Francisco d'Ancona.
Watching, we know you.
Assalamu alaikum, alhamdulillah rabbil alameen, assalatu wassalamu ala Rasulul Kareem, amma ba'd. Welcome, dear viewers. So last week we were talking about Shamima Begum and her being made stateless and everything else. This week actually we thought what we'll do is a bit of a health check and ask the question, what is the state of the Muslim community? Alhamdulillah, I'm honored to say again, Basharat Ali, lawyer and commentator and activist, has joined us. Walaikum assalam. And also on the phone joining us is Moazzam Begg, who's the outreach director for Cage. Assalamu alaikum, Moazzam.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Okay, jazakumullah khair for both of you for joining. So maybe if I start off with you, Moazzam, and just ask you this question. Is what's happening in Syria, is what's happening to Shamima Begum, is this whole issue of terrorism and extremism, is this the biggest problem we have in the Muslim community?
No, it's not. It's a problem. There are far greater problems, of course, that we're dealing with. Just in relation to Shamima Begum, I mean, myself and my organisation Cage have been working on numerous cases of individuals who had their nationalities revoked far before Shamima Begum came onto the scene. People weren't interested, I think, in that regard. But it has been happening almost to, last year was about 100 people. Prior to that, about 50 people, all by the Home Secretary at the time, who was Theresa May, and now, of course, she's the Prime Minister. So it's all happened under her watch. And I think one of the things that people need to know is that almost the overwhelming majority of people, I think almost all of those nationality revocations, have been Muslims. So even that in itself, if you put that aside, that's not the biggest issue that's affecting the Muslim community, but it is opening a door that's based upon the attitudes that exist in this country, and that is the post-Brexit anti-immigration, anti-Muslim, Islamophobic attitudes that are widely spread, commonly spread across the country. Just to give you one quick example before you go into Basharat, I was speaking in Newcastle just the other day, and I kid you not when I tell you that one EDL member came along, literally with tattooed on his head. He had a gollywog with dressed in a Union Jack, and that's tattooed on his head. Wow. And he's shouting and screaming in the midst of us. These are the sorts of people that are plaguing the Muslim community and feel confident enough to turn up at a mosque and start screaming their bile. Those are the sorts of things that Muslims are dealing with on a daily basis. Okay. That is the state of Britain today.
Okay, so Moazzam, if I ask you as well, I mean, what are the key issues of the Muslim community, or is it this counterterrorism and all of that kind of stuff?
I tend to agree with Moazzam that this is a problem, and it's quite an important problem. But as Muslims who hold on to their identity and their values, there are many problems. In relation to Shamima, if I can comment, many Muslims were falling over themselves to condemn her. These are ill-principled or ignorant people. Whatever their motivation, I really, quite frankly, couldn't give a damn. They are so eager to go out there and hang, draw and quarter this girl, even before she's been even allowed to come back here. And their reasoning is, as you said, made their bed and lie in it. And it shows a selfishness, a lack of regard. By contrast, our fellow citizens, friends, colleagues, non-Muslims, who are taking a principled stance, and there is a substantial majority, or certainly is 50-50, who actually take principled positions on things like this. And as Muslims, when we look at the challenges, because the way I look at it, in terms of prejudice, generally exists in this society. You know, a number of these MPs that left Labour and the Tories, and we had the MP that talked about the funny tinge. Now, racism, anti-Semitism, hatred of Muslims, etc., it's there. It exists in society. And as Muslims, we tend to be migrants and we're Muslims. So we're getting it double, right from society. And Moazzam mentioned the example at Newcastle University. Now,
sorry, it wasn't the university. It was actually
in
the
Newcastle.
biggest it's the biggest mosque there.
Oh, I see. Sorry, the biggest masjid in Newcastle. Forgive me, I didn't hear you. Now, if we go back to our parents and grandparents' generation when they first came here, the sort of racism that we are now experiencing is what they used to experience in the 60s and the 70s. It was open, in your face. I remember, you know, when we were growing up, Paki, go home, oh, you smell of curry. This sort of pathetic, even though the most popular food is a curry, you know, the irony is not lost. We grew up with this. We dealt with it.
Okay.
But the politicians have made a lot of this stuff, and some of the media, so some of the politicians, mainstream, some of the media have enabled and are enabling prejudice against other people as well as Muslims.
Okay, so let me actually bring Moazzam in. Just, I mean, you mentioned Islamophobia and everything else, you know, Brexit, anti-immigration, so many other factors. If these other things are issues, why is it then whenever the Muslim community is in the news, it is about this? It is about criminality, it is about terrorism, it is about extremism.
You know, I think one of the things that happens, if you just take a look at the kind of nature of Europe and look at what does Europe generally do when there is some sort of impending economic crisis and so forth, it turns on its minorities. Right across, we look at the 30s that happened in with the Jewish communities in Poland, in Czechoslovakia and Germany and so forth. They looked different, they had a different language, their dietary laws were different, they had dressed in a different way. And so the educational system was different. So they were targeted, clearly. And the full blame was placed upon them. Even though they were essentially, they'd been there for hundreds of years, they were white to look at, but very distinct and very different. And that's no different to what's happening to us right now. The response is a very European-style problem. The rise of the far right isn't just in the UK. It isn't just in France. It isn't just in Italy or the other nations. It's even in places like Hungary, where there's hardly any Muslims, or the Czech Republic, where Muslims are not there in presence, but they've got anti-Muslim laws and regulations. So clearly, what's happening is a European response to those that are deemed to be foreign. And I think that's one of the things that the Muslim community here, whether it's in law or legislation, or whether it's these measures of passports or nationalities being revoked, or whether it's simply the Islamophobia on the street, it's happening in a systematic way.
Okay, I mean, Moazzam mentions there a systematic way, and he was talking about Europe, and if I can bring you to answer, there are been laws in Europe that has banned the niqab in public places. People are being fined. There are been laws that's been brought in the Dutch region of, like, you know, halal meat not being allowed and all of this kind of stuff. I mean, all of these things, is it not creating, as Moazzam say, a kind of mood music for far worse things to happen?
Well, precisely. I mean, I'll give you an example. I took my daughter to a university for an interview. She wants to study international relations and Arabic. And I got talking to her lecturers, and I said, look, nationalism destroyed Europe for hundreds of years. And they were fighting, white Europeans were fighting each other. Because when the underlying belief of the state is benefit and getting one over the other, then competition leads to conflict. The last century saw 2 wars fought over secular, liberal, capitalist states over the Middle Eastern oil in the First World War, and the Second World War was Germany trying to reassert itself after what happened to it in the First World War, and the Treaty of Versailles and so on, how the Germans were dealt with. So nationalism based upon the supremacy or the superiority of a particular nation. So in this country, you see people typically identifying with the George Cross. The fact that George was an Arab, Syrian Christian is lost on many of these people. He wasn't British. But I mean, we'll park that for a second. And when that is flamed, then, as Moazzam said, with Viktor Orban and co in Hungary, and keep coming across Greece, Italy, Netherlands, Denmark, Germany, France, Austria. I mean, you've got literally neo-Nazi type people who are now at the seats of power because they have had to blame other people. And it's politicians seeking to get elected. Look, this is the issue here. They have to, the hostile environment in this country and the Windrush scandals where people who are actually British citizens were being excluded from this country, or those who had the right of abode, which is similar. Because people have to be seen tough to appease the minorities. It all started, I mean, it's been present at one level, but it's begun to simmer and boil over. And I think for Muslims, one of the things which I remember, khutbahs normally, from the days gone by, you used to fall asleep, except for the Imam would give the Moazzam would give the Iqamah. But one khutbah has stuck in my mind for well over 25, nearly 20 odd years ago. At that time, we were 1.5 million Muslims, nearly. And an Imam who was visiting, he said, I don't see you Muslims are having an effect on this society. He said a Sahabi would go to an area and by his character, by his dawah, by his direct dawah, by explaining Islam, by showing Islam, people would be affected. Whether they accepted Islam was not the issue, but they would come to Islam. And now we're 3.5 million. We love the statistics. We love boasting. But are you, Moazzam, are we all doing what's necessary so that the society here and Europe generally sees that Muslims are no threat? We're not enemies. We're no fifth column. And the lies and the double speak that politicians, the media, and neo-Nazi think tanks are spreading has to be exposed. I don't think we're doing our job properly in some respects. I say.
Okay, so I mean, just Moazzam, just bring you on that point. Do you think we're actually Muslims are setting a good example? Are we setting the right example?
Basharat brought a very, very important point, and I'd ask this question of most Muslims. And one of the things that's happened with me, there's hardly an area in this country that I haven't gone to because of the work that I've been doing. And often in those places, you go with a sense of apprehension, whether it's Totnes in Cornwall, whether it's the Keswick in the Lake District, or the Isle of Wight with Jersey, or these kind of places that my work has taken me to. You always feel this sense that this is going to be a very hostile environment for you. They've never seen a dark-skinned person here, let alone a Muslim. And what am I going to say to these people? And most of the time, I find, like 99% of the time, I find that I'm proved wrong. That they aren't hostile. They are very receptive. They just want to know. And we are, because of the way we are, we love to be in our closest communities. We talk to ourselves often. I mean, you've got to argue that one of the biggest dawah organizations that exists in the Muslim world is one that talks to Muslims only. And you have to ask yourself, why is that? Why is our dawah, however we want to call it, almost exclusively focused towards the Muslim world, but it isn't focused towards the way the Prophet ﷺ used to have his dawah, which was towards the mushrikeen. It wasn't even to Jews and Christians, it was towards idol worshippers. And his dawah was in a real hostile environment. And so the answer is right, that we are the authors of our own problems in this regard.
Okay, so let me just pause you there, because we are coming up to a break, and inshallah I do want to continue the discussion after the break. So join us after this short break. See you soon. Assalamu alaikum. So just before the break, I mean, we got the conversation moving on to, okay, how are Muslims being perceived? Are we actually doing what we should be doing, is living the example of Islam so that people get the right impression? I mean, if you look at the newspapers, if you look at the media, if you look at the legislations that are coming in, I mean, if you just look online, it would seem that Muslims are, just the most atrocious people.
Well, two things
in this country.
Firstly, as Moazzam also rightly said, when you sit with people, I'll give you an example. I was taking I'm not ashamed to admit it, an EasyJet flight once. And this bloke sat next to me, about 18 stones, tattoos, piercings. And this sense of prejudice, unfortunately, we Muslims have it as well. I thought, oh my God, this is going to be really interesting. He was one of the nicest blokes I've ever met. He bought me a coffee, we got talking, and we talked about all things. He was a tattoo artist.
Yeah.
The insularity amongst Muslims, sometimes, and we're not here to defend prejudice from wherever it comes, we are sometimes reluctant to talk to people. And we might, if I say something, what's going to happen? No. The Prophet ﷺ was commanded by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, "Ud'u ila sabili rabbika bil hikmah wal mau'izati al hasana wajadilhum billati hiya ahsan." He was ordered, invite to the way of your Lord, i.e. explain this deen. He couldn't guide. So the people are going to see the best example, the best speech. And if it means debating and discussing, jadala is literally to quarrel or debate, right? Then do it in the best possible way. MashaAllah, Moazzam has done some of his debates at Oxford and elsewhere, many others have. That intelligent non-Muslims are open-minded, they're happy to listen. And you can walk away from a discussion. I've done that. I've had very hot and heated discussions with people about very, very controversial issues. But I'm very blunt. I say, look, I believe in this. You believe in that. I respect your opinion. Tolerate my opinion from what it is. And the problem is too many Muslims will do mental gymnastics to fit Islam into this nice little matchbox or make it a nice little poodle to present to people what it is not. And all they've got to do is go and Google the particular issue and think, that Muslim's a liar. Well, what else is he or she lying to me about?
Okay, I mean, this is actually a very good point Basharat has raised. Moazzam, if I can bring you in. There is this sense, okay, you know, you're talking about Islam, and so which Islam are you talking about? There's a concept of British Islam, there's secular Islam, there's liberal Islam, there's even non-Muslim Islam as well. You know, I've left Islam and I'm talking about Islam. I mean, I know we're all laughing here, but it is actually seriously playing out in society.
Well, you know, look, even the way you just presented, I mean, to some people that may be true, but to me, like when we talk about halal, for example, there's just one halal. There isn't a, you know, haram halal. There isn't a pork halal. There isn't a, you know, all of these things that we know haram to be haram are as such. In the same way, Islam has interpretations, of course, many interpretations and many cultural parts that have come into Islam, but there isn't a secular Islam. There's no such thing as a contradiction in terms. There isn't a communist Islam. There isn't a capitalist Islam. Essentially, I mean, and this is something I think we as Muslims get caught up in. I include myself in this. That sometimes we think that the left is right and the right is wrong, as that makes sense, and we think one fits Islam and the other doesn't. But I want to remind this kind of term that we used to use back in the 80s. Some people used to say, La Sharqiyya, La Gharbiyya, Islamiyya, Islamiyya. That we're neither East, we're neither West, we're Islam. And I think we need to, because that is part of the fear, that the onslaught that's onto the Muslim community and Muslim beliefs and what is the definitions of Islam are no longer based upon what classical sources are. Sometimes now you can be a YouTube influencer. You can determine by the numbers of followers you have with absolutely no credentials at all as to what Islam is. You can determine what hijab is. You can determine what halal is, what haram is. And that's a great danger because we're moving away from classical and source-based, knowledge-based interpretations of Islam, which guide us into the direction that we need to be in.
Okay, I mean, what Moazzam just said is actually a very important point. So you actually have, I mean, on one hand, you know, we're not propagating and giving the message of Islam and all of that kind of stuff, but actually on the other hand, there are loads of people they're doing it on YouTube, they're doing it on Instagram or Snapchat or whatever, and they got thousands and thousands of followers. And it's like, you know, how to wear the hijab or how to pray or, you know, what's the right Islam and everything else. There's all of these things. I mean, this is a huge challenge.
Well, okay, I think let's go back to basics here. Islam is ever living. It's organic. It is ever relevant today as it was when Rasulullah received the final revelation. When Allah SWT says, الْيَوْمَ يَئِثَ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا مِنْ دِينِكُمْ فَلَا تَخْشَوْهُمْ وَاخْشَوْنِي. Do not fear those who are not believers, fear me. الْيَوْمَ أَكْمَلْتُ لَكُمْ دِينَكُمْ. Today I've completed my deen upon you. وَأَتْمَمْتُ عَلَيْكُمْ نِعْمَتِي وَرَدِيتُ لَكُمُ الْإِسْلَامَ دِينًا. And I've chosen for you Islam as your deen. So as Muslims, when we read the Quran, you know, our children are taught Quran in the madaris, in the marakis. And unless the ideas, the concepts, the thoughts are explained as being relevant today, as they were then, otherwise the children read this story, but then they go out into the world, they become young men and women, then they're not able to deal with. For example, we mentioned Shamima Begum. Had somebody properly explained to her what is Sharia, what is Khilafah, she would have recognized these criminals and Khawarij and Takfiris as what they were from day one. She wouldn't have been seduced. But the Imams, the A'imma, they shy away from the khutbahs are about boring, irrelevant subjects when the subject at hand is something very hot, whatever it might be. The khatibs, the Imams, we all have a responsibility. That does not allow a free pass to the hate mongers, the bigots, whether they're politicians, whether they're thinkers, whether they're people who pose as experts. We've got to call them out for what it is, and we should be able to have a principled discussion, which most of the Muslims who attacked Shamima Begum, for example, were incompetent or incapable of doing. Because when a society looks at an issue on it through a prisms-based framework, a principles-based prism rather, you are then able to teach. So, you know, Fir'aun and Musa alayhi salam, Now the magicians of Musa alayhi salam, of Fir'aun, are the modern day prevent officers. They're the magicians that come with their lies and half-truths. And when
Come
Musa
on, Bashar, I think you're giving them a bit too much credit there.
the point I wanted to finish it, they come with their sorcery and their dishonesty, whereas the magicians of Musa alayhi salam made sajda when they saw the truth. So these sort of people who are perpetuating the problem with their beards, with their hijabs, they are using emotive images and terminology to misguide Muslims in another direction. Okay, we've got the Takfiri Khawariji on one end, you've got these other people at the other end. And why are we, the Muslim majority, not dealing with the controversial issues head on?
Okay, that's a really good point. And I mean, obviously, the people at Prevent and everything else, what they would argue is that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to say that these guys are, you know, they're not following Islam and all of that kind of stuff. But Moazzam, I mean, just to pick up the point Basharat made about the Aimma or the Masajid or the Khutbah or the Halakha and everything else, why is it that, you know, the subjects that are needed to be discussed to give a holistic and perhaps a balanced impression of Islam, why are they not discussed, do you think?
You know, this is a question that's been going on for years, I think for decades at least. I remember recently, you know, not too long ago, I was at this conference about Islamophobia. It was in a church next to the biggest mosque in that city. That mosque had nothing to do with that event at all. So it tells you the types of relevance or rather irrelevance some of these masajid have to the current issues. And most of the youth, you know when they say the far right, say, well, we know what goes on in the mosque, they radicalize people there. I say, if only I wish that's what was going on. The reality is they desensitize people and make people numb. And so they want to go in, do the prayer, listen to the... I don't think they want to listen to the khutbah. They just want to get out. There's nothing of substance being told in a lot of those places. And that hasn't changed. And the substance I mean is that you're talking about policy, internal policy, foreign policy, tarbiyah, all of these things that are very relevant. And if you don't get those answers here, you will get them on YouTube. And as Basharat rightly said, the Khawarij Takfiri will get to you, or the so-called liberal extremists will get to you and distort Islam from either way. And we're left with this middle area that we're supposed to occupy and somehow fill it with knowledge, knowing that we'll be...
Well, I mean, one thing, if I can put to you, Moazzam, and also Basharat, is when imams do try to talk about these things, they're castigated and projected as extremists and problematic people.
That is true, and that's why, you know, for example, a lot of these mosques, as you know, they're surrounded by committees, and well, I don't know, there's a different discussion to have on the committees, but, you know, an imam can only be as strong as the people around him, and if those people don't stand with him, often you'll find that that imam literally will continue to self-censor, or they'll replace him. And they think, Muslim community thinks somehow, those people in those kind of leadership positions, somehow that this method has ever been beneficial to the community. It hasn't, and it's caused us a great deal of harm. And the road that we're going down now, if that is the case, that we want to placate every single time, will mean that our community become weaker and weaker, and they'll push on different fronts, and eventually we'll be left with a shell of our religion. Okay,
I mean, we are coming to the end, so both of you, if I can ask you just maybe in 30 seconds, I mean, going forward, I mean, we're trying to do a health check. What do you think are our priorities as a community going forward?
Being insular, inward looking is not an option. Islam and Muslims, no prophet ever was inward looking, they were outward looking. Number one, learn your deen properly, which, as Moazzam said, to reinforce it, the politics, the economics, the social life, every aspect of human existence, this deen addresses it. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was not unaware of such things. And the classical knowledge is important, but the classical ulama addressed the fitan of their times. Every time there was a problem, whether it was the fitna of the Khuluq al-Quran, Imam Ahmad al-Hanbal. When it was in India, Akbar with his Deen Ilahi, Mujaddid al-Thani, Sarhindi. Modern day ulama must address modern day problems, and us Muslims must support the imams and the scholars and the khatibs and the speakers who are addressing the problems, because that is the future for us in Islam.
Moazzam, last words from you?
Echo Basharat's sentiments there completely. What we need is the concept of courage, and courage as a community will pass through to those who are within leadership positions if the community itself teaches its youth, teaches its men, teaches its women about the courageousness of the prophets, of the companions, of the Rashideen, of the ulama, and so forth. And we look back at our history in order to see our future, inshallah.
Inshallah. Well, Jazakumullah khair to Moazzam and you, Basharat. We have come to the end of the show. Actually, I mean, there's actually a lot more to discuss on this, and maybe we will follow some of these topics more up. Okay, Jazakallah khair, Moazzam and Basharat, for joining us. We have come to the end of the program. Lots more to discuss, and inshallah, we will continue to discuss this. Join us again next week. Take care. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam.
Jazakallah khair.
Watching. We know you.